most of this week and last week trying to gather some information for you on the buildings that were in Egypt about our state of Egypt. Pyramids and stuff, people say the aliens built, mathematics weren't able to do that. And to be perfectly honest with you, there's not a ton of, thanks, I draw back. There's not a ton of information. Not a ton of accurate information that explicitly gives credit to the Israelites for being involved in the building of some of those pyramids. Now, with that being said, Ramses II, who is one of the pharaohs that we look at very much, was credited with building a whole bunch of these things. All right? So you can kind of take the pieces and put them together and say, well, if Ramses is given the credit for it, well, then who was there helping him do that? Of course, it was the Israelites. Now, Ramses also was known to, scratch the names off of some stuff, too, and put his name on it. So there's quite a bit of evidence for that as well. But the math and the work that was put into in the way that they built the pyramids leads to showing that these people had a pretty good knowledge, working knowledge of math and science and how to take load-bearing platforms and make them to where they're not going to fall down in the way that they built them and all sorts of different things. There's archaeological evidence that, for example, just a small example, to build the pyramid that tall with those stones that would have been very heavy, obviously you couldn't have just rigged up a pulley system and wrapped it around and had guys that wouldn't have worked. Easiest way to do it was to build a ramp, and that ramp would have been a very low grade. You just gradually got to the top of it. And of course, you would have had to start back a long ways and then gradually kind of an incline to get up there. So that what they did, and there's evidence, there's slide mark evidence, there's what they call slipways, things that they use to help move some of those stuff. And it was all done, not all of it done exclusively by the Israelites, but a lot of the science that they used to build some of that stuff kind of generated from some of the stuff that they had known and kind of cultural things that they were using as well. So while there was not enough information to need to build an entire lesson on the pyramids the Israelites built, there are a ton of evidence that states that they were probably involved with it. We can't say that for sure, but there's a ton of evidence for it. Like you can answer Genesis, Ken Ham, all those guys that do this kind of stuff, and they'll suggest it, say, yeah, it's probable, they were there, this guy was doing it, but they can't. There's nowhere in Scripture that says the Israelites built the Sphinx. There's nowhere in Scripture that says the Israelites built the pyramids. So they were probably involved with it, just because of the guys who were in charge of it. So there's that. I had mentioned that a couple of times. I started to gather some stuff and work a little more on this week because I wanted to do it before we got into Moses essentially going back to Egypt. But I couldn't find a whole bunch of stuff that goes with it. Secondly, I'm glad nobody's caught the corona yet. It's good to see that you're here, doing well. Hope that stays that way. That you stay good and healthy. And I'm glad that you're here this morning. Well, let's get into this. Lesson number 3, deals with the third promise that God, the third revelation here that God is going to continue to show to Moses. This one covers chapters 4 through chapter 7. So this is a lot of information. So this will take us a couple of weeks to get through. But what we see now is Moses is going to have this transition from being there in Midian to where he's a shepherd, working there for Jethro, and asking his employer if he can go back to Egypt. Reluctantly so. But we see him kind of getting ready to head back to Egypt and head back to the Israelites. And as Moses is kind of, building up the courage to go back, God is going to continue to remind him of the promises, going to continue to remind him of the commitment that he has made to his people. And then we're going to see God demanding Moses to have that same type of commitment. Right? He's going to say, Moses, I told the Israelites I would take care of them. I told them I would be committed to them. I'm going to demand that you stay committed to me during this process. Okay? I'm going to take care of everything. I told you last week. I'm the transcendent one, right? I'm going to be there the entire time. And I promise you that. You have to know because of who I am. I am the promise keeper. Okay? And we see an important revelation here of God, Him revealing Himself to Moses in a very, very important light that we'll get into probably within the next couple of weeks. But it's interesting to see kind of what He does here for Moses. And if I call him Noah a couple of times, I apologize. Pip is, we're reading, she likes the story of Noah's Ark right now, so we're doing that every night. So it's, and she sometimes calls Noah Moses and I have to correct. So if I go back and forth a couple of times, just know I mean Moses, not by Noah's an accident. So let's get to verse 18 of chapter 4. And let's start there, and we'll see our first first little bit of this. God's going to state once again His commitment to Israel. I'm going to communicate that, His commitment to Israel directly to Moses and make it much more personal for him to kind of help continue to build Moses' courage, okay, as we kind of move through this. So verse 18 down through verse 23 says this. And Moses went and returned to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said unto him, Let me go, I pray thee, and return to my brethren, which are in Egypt, and see whether they be yet alive. And Jethro said to Moses, Go in peace. And the Lord said unto Moses in Midian, Go, return into Egypt, for all the men are dead which sought thy life. And Moses took his wife and his sons, and set them upon an ass, and he returned to the land of Egypt. And Moses took the rod of God in his hand. And the Lord said unto Moses, When thou goest to return into Egypt, see that thou do all these wonders before Pharaoh, which I have put in thine hand. But I will harden his heart, that he shall not let the people go. And thou shalt say unto Pharaoh, Thus saith the Lord, Israel is my son, even my firstborn. And I say unto thee, Let my son go, that he may serve me. And if thou refuse to let him go, behold, I will slay thy son, even thy firstborn. So perhaps here, maybe just out of some courtesy, Moses goes back to Midian from Sinai to ask Jethro his permission to go. Now, if Jethro would have said no, Moses was going anyways, but he was just politely making sure doing the right thing here, asking for his permission so that he can get to Egypt. See that there in verse 18. And he says to Jethro, he wants to see what's the reason for going back in verse 18. What's he say? What's that? He wants to see how they're doing, right? He wants to go back in Egypt, see his brethren, and see how they're doing. Go on and check on them, essentially. And, of course, we see Jethro, of course, telling Moses, no big deal, go in peace. And then, of course, God, we saw down through verses, there in verse 19, God comes to Moses one more time and directs him again to return back to Egypt. And he tells him in verse 19 specifically, one of the fears of what was one of the fears for going back to Egypt for Moses? When he left, it was what? They were going to kill him, right? That was one of the fears. It was one of the excuses. I can't go back, those people want to kill me. We see in verse 19, God tells him what? Those people, they're not there anymore. They've all died. Nobody remembers what you've done. You don't have to worry about going back. And God reminded here Moses that he had, tried at that point to take the deliverance of God's people into his own hands there. Right? Moses saw the Egyptian being mean, overly mean to those Hebrews, and he killed the man, tried to not set himself up as the leader, but we saw that turned out to be a huge blunder. And Moses is what he was doing there by killing him. He ended up fleeing from Egypt because of that. But now Moses here was to return to Egypt to help lead the Israelites out of Egypt. This is going to be according exactly how God wanted it. according to his plan and according to his timing. So we see verse 20, Moses saddles up the family, grabs some donkeys, puts his family on, and heads back towards Egypt. And one thing we see mentioned there in verse 20 is that he takes the family, takes his stuff. What else does he have as well with him? The rod. And do we call that, is that Moses' staff? It's not, right? What's that staff called? The rod of God. What is that staff going to do here in the next weeks and months to come? It's going to change into a snake. It's going to change the water into blood. It's going to take the staff and do what to it as the Red Sea? Take the water. There's going to be a lot of stuff here that God uses that. So we see it being called the rod of God there. He's making sure that he has that with him as well. Now, Moses having that, and the reason that's there in verse 20, that's put in there, is that it's obviously not just an ordinary staff. Of course, it's the rod of God, it says, but it also shows physical evidence that God is with Moses. Right? Moses' reasoning for not wanting to go in last chapter and last lessons, what were some of the reasonings? Speak well, not put up for this. How will I know that I'm supposed to do this? Over and over and over, God said what to him? I will what? I'm going to be with you the whole time. He's going to say no, it's going to cause a problem, but the whole time, through the entirety of this, I'm going to be with you. Okay? And it wasn't enough for Moses to just accept the fact that God was going to be with him, right? God goes a step further and gives him physical evidence that he can hold his right hand and used to walk with and be with him all the time. So he can, as a reminder that God is with him and going to be with him through the entirety of it. Moses' family, of course, would become the center here of a crisis as they journeyed back to Egypt. But first, God had a message for Moses to help put the coming crisis into focus. Okay? And we see that in verse 22. God gives this personalized message for Pharaoh, for him to give Pharaoh. So go back to verse 22 with me. It says, "Thou shalt say unto Pharaoh, Thus saith the Lord, Israel is my son, even my firstborn. And I say unto thee," in verse 23, "Let my son go, that he may serve me. And if you refuse to let him go, behold," what's the message here? "I will slay your firstborn." Okay? Now, the sense of firstborn here, especially during this time, firstborn meant what? The firstborn son would have been the guy that was going to carry the name, right? He outranked the other siblings, essentially. So there was more importance placed on the firstborn son than any of the other siblings, because that was the one that was going to get the inheritance or take charge of the kingdom or whatever the case may have been. So we know the importance of that. Now, no people group on earth was more important to God at this time than the Israelites were, and Pharaoh was the one that was holding them captive. Of course, we know God's special relationship with Israel. He has so even to this day. Chose them to be his people and made a covenant, of course, giving them the promised land and all the things he promised Abraham that we saw in the book of Genesis as well. Okay, so there is some seriousness to the relationship that God has with Israel. Okay, eventually, of course, we know God's going to take the life of Pharaoh's firstborn son. If Pharaoh doesn't let people go, God's taking the enslavement of his people very, very seriously. Now, how does seeing here God's love towards Israel, or seeing that God treats Israel as a son, help us understand God's commitment to them? So he reveals Israel as the firstborn son. What does that say about God's commitment? What does it reveal about God in his relationship with Israel?
They're the one.
The apple of the eye, right? the love, the deepness of the love, the extent of the commitment, and how much responsibility he feels for them. And he's going to make sure that he keeps up with the promises that he has given them. Okay, so God here tells Moses to specifically tell Pharaoh that he needs to let the people go so that they can serve him, and he can treat them as the firstborn. So at this moment, as Moses is getting ready, as he is en route, or is getting ready to travel back to Egypt, God is setting up this God versus Pharaoh fight, essentially, to put it in really simple layman terms. It's going to be God versus Pharaoh and the gods of Pharaoh. Of course, we know the Egyptians had tons of gods, and worshipped them, and thought that was the reason for their success there in the Nile River and living in the Fertile Crescent. So it's going to be God versus Pharaoh, God versus Pharaoh, God versus Pharaoh, God versus Pharaoh's God, God versus Pharaoh's God, over and over and over again. And God is using this, first of all, to get his people out of Egypt and to send them to the Promised Land, but also to, I don't want to say reveal himself to the Israelites, but to establish a greater connection with the people of Israel so they can see the importance of that relationship with him. Right? God has not been non-existent to the Israelites, but has allowed them to be there in slavery for some time. And probably the majority of those people had maybe not, I won't say forgotten about God, but kind of had the idea of, well, he brought us here with Joseph, and things were good, and now he's left us here and allowed us to be enslaved. So God is, for a lack of a better word, is going to reestablish himself amongst his people. And he's going to use this exodus out of Egypt to kind of help give proof to the Israelites that he still loves them. They are important to him. Okay? And then to kind of give some evidence for that he's greater than Pharaoh. Because right now, in those Israelites' eyes, Pharaoh's the big bad baddie, and he's got all the power, and nobody can stop him. God's going to come in and show that is not the case. Of course, this is going to kind of come to a climax, or come to a head, when God ultimately takes the life of Pharaoh's son, just like Moses is going to tell him. So, verse 24. So we see God personalizing his commitment to Israel, just giving more background for the reason on why Moses is doing this. He then, in verses 24, 25, and 26, after revealing his commitment to Moses, he's going to demand that same type of commitment from him. Okay? Verse 24. And it came to pass, by the way, in the end, that the Lord met him and sought to kill him. Then Zipporah took a sharp stone and cut off the foreskin of her son, and cast it at his feet, and said, Surely a bloody husband art thou to me. So he let him go. Then she said, So he let him go. Then she said, A bloody husband thou art, because of the circumcision. Okay, so following here the statement of God's commitment to Israel is kind of a three-verse that just feels like it came out of left field. Right? God's just talking about his commitment. You get to verse 24, and then all of a sudden, it's like things are just in absolute turmoil. It's kind of out of left field scenario or event takes place. God confronts here Moses, okay? And God seemed anything but committed to Israel at this point when he threatens Moses, his supposed chosen deliverer of Israel. So back to verse 24, right? It tells him this, and then it came to pass by the way in the end that the Lord met him and sought to kill him. You just took this verse, plucked it out. I gave this to you and said, Moses was supposed to be the guy that's lead the people out of Israel, or lead the people out of Egypt. And you read this verse. What would your thoughts be in the kind of the context here of God's commitment to Israel?
Would seem pretty contrary.
It seemed pretty contrary, right? That God may have told Moses this, but maybe it was just for whatever reason. It doesn't make any sense. That's why, simple, small little lesson, you just pull out random verses and use them to bend to our will, right? However you want to. It says this over in this verse says this, and it means this. It's not the case. Okay, we can't do that. People do that all the time. It doesn't work, right? They try to use verses and small portions of the Scriptures to help satisfy their own desires or their own needs or make their argument more than the others. You can't pull things out of context. Perfect example of that. Reading the whole of the entirety of the context, we understand exactly what God was doing. God's anger here with Moses had gotten to be pretty, not severe, but he wanted to make a point. And it had to be related here to the rite of circumcision. Okay, while God detained Moses, we see in verse 24, his wife Zipporah circumcises Moses' son and then casts the foreskin there at Moses' feet. Now, this idea of circumcision is how God did what? This whole, we know what it is, but what was the reasoning for it? Why does God let this take place in the Israelites? Because it shows what? Separation. It shows separation, okay? It shows that they are not dedicated, but I can't think of the word off the top of my head. I lost it. Consecrated. Thank you. Consecrated again. Okay? And apparently, Moses had not. Now, is Moses a Hebrew? Would Moses have been circumcised when he was a baby? Should he have done the same thing to his sons? Obviously, he had what? Had not done that yet. Okay? Why is this important that he hasn't done it? Why is this here? There's a reason for it. Moses hadn't what? Fully done what yet? Hadn't fully obeyed, hadn't fully committed. Exactly. He hadn't fully obeyed, he hadn't fully committed. And he's going and on his way to Egypt, and God is essentially breaking down everything else that all of the doubts are in Moses' mind this time. So we see this event. That's why these three verses are thrown in here. Seems completely random, but what it is that God is continuing to break down the doubt and disbelief that Moses had. Moses knew that he should have circumcised his son on the 8th day, is that right? And he knew that it should have taken place, and he hadn't done it. He was in direct disobedience to the covenant of God. So we see more of kind of some of the reservations that Moses has here at this point. God continuing to break these things down. So God shows his personalized commitment. Now he's demanding the same type of commitment to come from Moses. Now apparently Zipporah, his wife, didn't think much of the rite of circumcision. And she probably conducted this ritual out of the fear for Moses' life. God forced her hand to ensure that Moses' family performed this rite of the covenant. God let Moses go once the circumcision was complete. Verse 26. So he let him go, that she said, "A bloody husband thou art, because of the circumcision." Okay? Go back over to Genesis chapter 17 real quick with me. And let's go to verse 10. Genesis 17, verse 10. And let's read down through verse 14. Okay? "This is my covenant which ye shall keep between me and you, and thy seed after thee. Every man child among you shall be circumcised. And ye shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a token of the covenant betwixt me and you. And he that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you, every man child in your generations. He that is born in the house, or bought with money of any stranger, which is not of thy seed. He that is born in thy house, and he that is bought with thy money, must needs be circumcised. And my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. And the uncircumcised man whose flesh of his foreskin is not circumcised, the soul shall be cut off from thy people, or from his people. He hath broken my covenant." So back over here, what's the consequence for not performing this rite of circumcision? The promise that God has given the Israelites is what? What's the threefold Abrahamic promise? Land, the descendants and the blessed, right? Jesus Christ. Okay? If you are not circumcised, what is the consequence? That covenant is what? That is the breaker of the covenant, right? That's the covenant breaker. It said, verse 14, it says that the covenant will be broken, right? So up until this point, Moses' son is a covenant breaker. So how can Moses go back and give these people the promise of helping them satisfy the Abrahamic covenant that God has given him if his own son is not even part of the ritual that should have taken place? So we see now why this 3 verses here is just stuck in the middle of this on its way back. Because it is a very, very, very important part. Moses still at this point, even though God had showed to him in the burning bush, even though God had revealed to him the rod turning into a snake, even then turning back, hand leprosy and back, and over and over again, talking about his transcendence, and telling him his promise, and showing him that he's going to be there, Moses still was not fully committed. It took a major event. God's going to kill him. He shows up to Moses and he captures him and says, I am going to kill you unless you give me the commitment I require. Now Moses is a great responsibility, right? And he's given a great opportunity. He's been blessed with a whole bunch of things. This rod that can do this stuff, these tricks he can do because of God, and all this awesome stuff. But with great power comes great responsibility. And that's what God is trying to reveal and show to Moses, and that's what he's demanding from him. The account here, we see these 3 verses, reveals God's demands that Moses be committed to. God wanted Moses to honor him and to take this rite of circumcision seriously. He expected circumcision to be an outward sign of the heart for him. Deuteronomy 30, verses 4, 5, and 6. Romans 2, 28, 29. A couple of those we don't have time to turn to. So how could Moses lead God's covenant people out of Egypt if he hadn't even practiced circumcision on his own boys? That brings us to verse 27. So we see God stating his commitment again, God making this more personal and demanding the same type of commitment from Moses. And we now see verses 27 down to verse 31, Israel worshiped God for his commitment to them. Verse 27. And the Lord said to Aaron, go into the wilderness to meet Moses. And he went and met him, the mount of God, and kissed him. So where is Aaron at right now? Let's just think Moses, the event that just took place with his sons in Zipporah. The scene kind of shifts a little bit. Where is Aaron located? Physically, where is he at right now? He's in Egypt, right? He's part of the slavery, okay? And we know that Aaron is what kin to Moses? Let's just get this thing. He's the brother, okay? So Aaron is in in Egypt. Moses is not in Egypt, but is working his way to Egypt. God comes to Aaron and tells him to go out there in verse 27 into the wilderness and to meet up with Moses. Now, do we see Aaron here having any type of hesitation at all? We don't, right? We don't. God comes to Aaron and tells him that, and we see that as soon as he gets up, goes into the wilderness, meets Moses in the mount of God there, and is glad to see him, kisses him there, and is very glad to see him. Down in verse 28, then Moses kind of catches Aaron up on the last 40 years, or more so probably the last couple of weeks in his life. Things have changed quite a bit. And Moses told Aaron, verse 28, all the words of the Lord who had sent him, and all the signs which he had commanded him. And Moses and Aaron went and gathered together all the elders of the children of Israel. And Aaron spake all the words which the Lord had spoken unto Moses, and did the signs in the sight of the people. Okay? Now, undoubtedly, when these 2 guys finally see each other after all this time, they spend some time catching up and talking about all the stuff that was going on in the last 40 years. But we see the account here jumping straight into Moses telling Aaron what God's commanded of him, and then them going right to the leaders in Egypt. Down through verse 30, Aaron speaking telling him all the stuff that's going on. And he's just following what God has told Moses to do. Verse 31, the people believed, and they heard that the Lord had visited the children of Israel, and that he had looked upon their afflictions, and they bowed their heads in worship. Okay? So, Aaron and Moses go to the elders, tell them what's going on, and we see that the people of Israel here are more than willing, more than ready for God to kind of help lead them out of Egypt. So in light here of this very first response to God, how would you expect the elders of Israel to respond to God moving forward? We see how their initial response is. Yes, 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 yes. Worship God, pray. We see, understand the importance of this. What would you expect the response to be going forward? The exact same thing, right? Gratitude, thankfulness, whatever they need, whatever God calls them to do, they're willing to do. Some total submission, all for whatever it is what you would expect. Especially the way that Moses shows up 4 years later and says, hey, God showed up to me in a burning bush. Aaron says, God showed up to Moses in a burning bush. And this is what he said these people are all about. You would expect kind of that same type of idea going forward. Now we get to chapter 5. And so the scene is now, the plan, the scene for the rest of the book of Exodus, at least the next foreseeable future here, the next few chapters, the scene is set. Moses is back in Egypt. He's there with his brother Aaron. The elders are on board. Let's get out of Dodge. Okay? It is kind of where we're at. But God's not done teaching Moses and these people lessons yet. First 18 verses, we see, we're just going to read the first 4 we've done for the day. We see Pharaoh denying God's request. Okay? So, verse 1. And afterward Moses and Aaron went in and told Pharaoh, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast unto me in the wilderness. And Pharaoh said, who is the Lord, that I shall obey his voice to let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go. And they said, the God of the Hebrews hath met with us. Let us go, we pray, 3 days' journey into the desert, and sacrifice unto the Lord our God, lest he fall upon us with pestilence or with sword. And the king of Egypt said unto them, wherefore do ye, Moses and Aaron, let the people from their works get you unto your burdens? So Moses, Aaron go in, the first communications here they now have with Pharaoh, and communicate the demands of the Lord God to let the people go and to have a feast in the wilderness. Why would you expect Pharaoh? We see Pharaoh's response, right? Pharaoh's response is what?
Get back to work.
Get back to work. Who is this God you talk about? I don't know who this is. Who is this God you talk about? Why would you expect Pharaoh to have such a low opinion of Israel's God, considering Israel's situation?
Well, he had enslaved those people.
Exactly, right? So, and we know the Egyptians had tons of gods. So, for him to hear about this God, he would have thought that maybe the God is very, very weak because he can't even allow me to capture them and take over them and use them as my workers now for several years. Having delivered people for over 100 years of slavery must not be very strong. Moses and Aaron tries to appeal here to Pharaoh, saying that God is going to bring pestilence and his sword on Israel. They did not allow them to sacrifice. So Moses and Aaron said, if you don't allow this to happen, this God is going to kill your workers, essentially, right? He's going to have pestilence and a sword come down on your slaves. He's going to kill a bunch of them. They're not going to be able to do anything for you. They're not going to be able to work in any way whatsoever. So they tried to appeal to him. But Pharaoh, we see, wants Moses and Aaron to kind of stop encouraging the Israelites to think about this nonsense, right? He wants them to get back to work. Verse 4, and the king of Egypt said unto them, wherefore do ye, Moses and Aaron, let the people from their works get you unto your burdens? Don't feed these people full of lies. This God of even Israel obviously is not as strong as the God that I have. Don't feed these guys a bunch of fluff, get their hopes up, tell them to get back to work. Okay? And as we get into next week, we'll see again more of the response here that we see from Pharaoh. And then Moses should have expected Pharaoh to say no, right? Because why? God had told him, he gave him the PowerPoint last week, right? Gave him the bull PowerPoint. This is what's going to happen. This and this and this and this and this. So Moses should have been expecting and prepared for Pharaoh to say no, and the things that were going to come in the next few chapters as well. So we'll get into that a little more next week. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the lesson we have here, for your continued working on Moses. When he finally halfway committed and said, okay, I'll do it, and you continue to prod at him, continue to work at him, continue to essentially purify his character so that he can be more than ready to lead these people, Lord. We thank you for the fact that you were faithful first to your promise, but you were then committed to making sure that Moses was committed as well. He's going to go on with or without him. You wanted to bring him along and reveal some things to him as well. As you see it, as we see it,